Good morning out there, everybody in YouTube land. A busy night, and it's going to be a busier morning. I brought you a couple special editions here on Level-Headed News last night that you might want to take a look at. I had a lot of articles on a couple subjects there, so I went ahead and did special editions on those, so I didn't clog up the regular current event broadcast with that. And we'll go ahead and bring you the news here today on the 13th day of October 2016. First article that I have for you is off of sfgate.com. And I'm waiting for the little hamster to catch up to me here and get it up on the screen. All right, here we go. 2 Boston police officers shot, wounded. Suspect is dead. This happened last night. 2 Boston police officers were shot and wounded while responding to a report of a person with a gun, said police, who later confirmed that the suspect was dead. The officers came under fire late Wednesday night at a home in East Boston neighborhood. It was possibly a domestic incident gone bad, said Police Commissioner William Evans. One of the officers was shot multiple times and was hospitalized in critical condition at Massachusetts General Hospital. A second officer was shot once or twice and was listed in stable condition, Evans told reporters at the scene early Thursday morning. We got an ad trying to play here that I need to get on. There we go. Police initially asked residents of the neighborhood to shelter in place as they searched for the suspect. They later said the suspect was dead and the situation was under control. I commend the officers. They moved in and neutralized the threat pretty quick, that no one else got killed, said Evans. Police did not immediately identify the suspect or the wounded officers. Evans said that he and Boston Mayor Martin Walsh were able to meet with the officers' families. He asked that the community pray for the officers. So there you have that pretty much breaking news. That just happened last evening. The next one that we have for you is off of usatoday.com. It's back at rebel-held radar sites in Yemen. And we can get the off of here. Goodness gracious. These things are horrible with the ads. My. Doesn't seem to be any end to the ads. Let's see. Here we go. The Navy retaliated for missiles fired at its ships off the coast of Yemen in recent days by destroying 3 radar sites in rebel-held territory, the Pentagon announced late Wednesday. The Navy counterattacked with multiple Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles was approved by President Obama. This will respond to any further threat to our ships and commercial traffic as appropriate, and will continue to maintain our freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, the Bab al-Mandeb and elsewhere around the world, Pentagon Press Secretary Peter Cook said. Oh my goodness gracious. These ads. Trying to get this stuff to calm down. Where's that one at? So I can stop it. Oh my, okay. Think I got it stopped. Where you at chasing ads on these things? Let's try again. The sites and territory controlled by Shiite rebels known as Houthis Red Sea coast appear to have been destroyed, Cook said. The Tomahawks were fired from the USS Ninth at about 4 a.m. local time, the Pentagon said. Fire at the sites was active during the launches of cruise missiles at the U.S. ships, including the destroyer USS Mason on Wednesday, the Pentagon said. None of the enemy missiles damaged Navy ships. The radar sites were in remote areas near Ras Isa, north of Mukah. There was a little risk of civilian casualties, the Pentagon said. Yemen's Saba news agency, which is controlled by the Houthis, quoted a military official denying that the rebels targeted a U.S. ship. The U.S. logistical support and refueling to the Saudi-led coalition against the Houthis. Sharif Ackerman spoke for the Yemeni army, called the incident an American farce to find a reason to interfere in Yemen directly after failure of the Saudis, the Associated Press reported. Of missiles at the U.S. ships followed the bombing of a funeral hale in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a, apparently by forces from the Saudi coalition that killed at least 140 people Saturday, by the Houthis. Human Rights Watch said the bomb was manufactured in America. The U.S.-based organization said the bombing was an apparent war crime and called on the United States, the United Kingdom, and other governments to immediately suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia. So there's the next one that we have is off of WND.com. I'm wearing my little hamster out with all this news that I've been bringing you. This one says, now RICO turned against climate change activists. And give her a chance to scroll down so I can read this article. Yeah, come on, little hamster. My. He's taking his time this morning. And there's an ad trying to play. Down. He can hush. All right, I think I got him hushed. Okay, it was a year ago when a long list of scientists wrote to the Obama administration urging the federal government to use RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, against global warming skeptics. I sent a letter addressed to President Obama, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and Office of Science and Technology's Policy Director John Holden. They appreciate that you are making aggressive and imaginative use of the limited tools available to you in the face of recalcitrant Congress. One additional tool recently proposed by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a RICO Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act investigation of corporations and other organizations that have knowingly deceived the American people about the risk of climate change as a means to forestall America's response to climate change, they wrote, according to Politico. Now the tables are turned. A mathematician and software engineer has filed a lawsuit in Texas naming dozens of environmental groups and others seeking to influence public action and expenditures regarding global warming programs and an action alleging violations of RICO. Plaintiff Leonard Goldstein explains at the outset of his complaint, this is a civil lawsuit against Climate Action Network and other corporations who engaged in long-term criminal scheme involving a false claim that photogenic release or emissions of carbon dioxide caused a dangerous global warming or a dangerous climate change, and prosecution of the dissidents or demanding government actions based on this false claim, including money transfers. In fact, the anthropogenic release of carbon dioxide significantly increases agricultural production worldwide. The surface warming theoretically caused by increased concentration of carbon dioxide is insignificant and almost undetectable and is expected to be globally beneficial. Institute expert H. Sterling Burnett reported David Schneier of the Energy and Environmental Legal Institute said the claim is not realistic because the First Amendment protects free speech, including speech of those who believe the end of the world is near. We all wish intellectual elites can discourse in freedom on issues of importance to us all in a manner that allows open, robust argument, even when discourse is marred by logical fallacies and hyperbole. I will not engage in any efforts to shut down the public forum, he said. Aaron Abell of the Center for Energy and Environment at the Competitive Enterprise Institute said the report that the action may, as a letter sent to Democratic Attorney General threatening to prosecute climate skeptics, Republican Attorney General points out, if global warming skeptics under statutes targeting under organized crime, risks of climate change, then global warming alarmists could be prosecuted for exaggerating the risk of climate change, said Abell. Alarmists could also be prosecuted for denying or grossly underestimating the deleterious effects of their energy rationing policies on human flourishing. Millions of poor people will further impoverished by the higher energy prices resulting from the alarmist policy agenda, Abell said in the Heartland report. Poverty is a lot worse for people's health and well-being than warmer temperatures. The action was filed in U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas by Goldstein against what he's calling the Climate Action Network and the rest. Organizations such as Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Ford Foundation, Greenpeace, Sierra Club, the U.S. Climate Action Network, Global Call for Climate Action Group, Friends of Earth, Environmental Defense Fund, Earth Justice Trust, the Packard Foundation, and Tides Foundation. The case charges that the defendants have participated in. Well, we've got another one trying to play here. Good grief. They need to hush. Chinese President Xi. Oh, now you hush. Tip. All right. I think I got her hushed. Now, back to where I was. Okay, the case charges that the defendants have participated in climate alarmism enterprise. Imagery threat of the carbon dioxide emissions as a lever to obtain power and money was first expressed in the report from 1972, the United Nations Environmental Program. Nevertheless, top U.S. scientists discussed the potential influence of the carbon dioxide emissions on the global climate, and Congress even convened the Carbon Dioxide Assessment Committee. CDAC worked on the question from 1979 to 1983, firmly rejecting alarm and recommended further research. An observation particularly eliminated the earlier concerns about the carbon dioxide emissions, he explains. We'll try to get it to go up here a little bit. Poor little hamster, he's running so hard today. Well, okay, this one doesn't want to go up any further. I think we've got the basic gist of this one, though, about this. And if you want to check out the rest of it at your leisure, you're welcome to do so. And we'll move on to the next article. This is off of Reuters.com. It says, disappointing China trade data spurs fears recovery may be faltering. Well, yeah. China's September exports fell 10% from year earlier, far worse than expected, while imports unexpectedly shrank after picking up in August, suggesting signs of steadying in the world's second largest economy may be short-lived. The disappointing trade figures pointed to weaker demand both at home and abroad, and deepened concerns over the latest depreciation in China's yuan currency. And then it gives the abbreviations for those. It's CNY equals CFXS, which hit a fresh 6-year low against a firming U.S. dollar on Thursday. This comes on the heels of weak South Korean trade data, and it definitely makes us worry about what extent global demand is improving, said Louis Kugis, head of Asia economics at Oxford Economics in Hong Kong. Asian stocks tumbled to 3-week lows, and U.S. stock futures and treasury yields fell after the data, while copper prices in London slipped. China's export had been expected to fall 3%, slightly worse than in August, as global demand for Asian goods remains stubbornly weak despite heading into what is usually the peak year-end shopping season. Weaker demand for Chinese goods was seen nearly all of its major markets in the U.S., Europe, and much of Asia. Imports shrank 1.9%, dashing hopes for a second rise in a row. Imports had unexpectedly grown 1.5% in August, the first expansion in nearly 2 years. Stronger demand for coal and commodities such as iron ore, which are feeding a construction boom. That left China with trade surplus of $41.99 billion for the month, the lowest in 6 months. The General Administration of Customs said on Thursday analysis had expected it to expand slightly to $53 billion. The weaker trade readings could raise concerns about other September data and third quarter GDP over the coming week. Economists had expected the data to show the economy was stabilizing and perhaps even slowly picking up. The import reversal raises questions over the strength of the recent recovery in domestic demand. Julian Evans Pritchard at Capital Economics said in a note, "This could be an early sign that the recent recovery in economic activity is losing momentum, although we would caution against reading too much into single data point given the volatility figures," he said. The continued overwhelming performance of Chinese exports adds weight to our view that the People's Bank will maintain its recent policy of gradual trade weighted remitted by the yuan depression in coming quarters, he added. Last month, World Trade Organization cut its forecast for global trade growth this year by more than a third to 1.7%, reflecting a slowdown in China and falling levels of imports into the United States. Sluggish external demand will continue to weigh on China's trade outlook, given downside risk stemming from the U.S. election to the UK's execution of the Brexit process. We do not foresee exports being a growth driver of the Chinese economy over the next few quarters, ANZ economists said in a note. Not even a sharp increase in China's Apple iPhone shipments could offset the broad-based downturn in September, ANZ added. To be sure, China's imports of crude oil rose 18% on year to daily record, while iron ore purchases surged to the second highest on record, suggesting its demand for global commodities is hardly falling off a cliff. Steel mills, in particular, appear to be running hot to meet demand from a housing boom and governmental infrastructure projects, which are driving higher profits through government efforts to excess capacity. But copper, coal, and soybean imports fell from last August. China imported too much copper in the beginning of the year, said Chris Wu, an analyst at CRU Beijing, a consulting firm. The lagging effect from property market is still helping with some of the end-use sectors, for example, wire and cables and white goods. But we are afraid the boom is close to an end. The customs spokesperson said on Thursday rising imports of oil and other commodities showed demand is improving, adding that government's trade policies is having a positive effect. After a rough start to the year, China's economy has shown signs of steadying, thanks largely to a building boom, but some analysts warn that the housing frenzy may be peaking as more cities impose restrictions on home buying to keep prices from overheating. Data have also highlighted increasing imbalances in China's economy, with growth increasing reliant on government spending as private investment falls to record lows. Larger state firms are expanding, likely thanks to Beijing's largesse, but smaller manufacturers continue to struggle. So there you have that. The next one that we have here is off dailymail.co.uk. Vote Trump or risk a nuclear war, Putin's ally warns the U.S. Russian president's friend says Republican candidate is the only person who can calm growing tensions. How this reads. Americans should vote for Donald Trump as president next month or risk being dragged into an apocalyptic nuclear war, a close ally of Russian leader Vladimir Putin has threatened. Vladimir, a flamboyant lawmaker known for his fiery rhetoric, said the Republican candidate was the only person able to calm the growing tension between Moscow and Washington. By contrast, Mr. Zelensky, Democratic rival Hillary Clinton becomes president, it would spark World War III. Many Russians regard Mr. Zelensky as a clownish figure who makes outspoken statements to grab attention, but he is also viewed as a faithful servant of the Kremlin who is sometimes used to radical opinions to test public reaction. Relations between Russia and the United States can't get any worse. The only way they can get worse is if war starts, said Mr. Zelensky. Americans voting for president must realize they are voting for peace on planet Earth if they vote for Trump. But if they vote for Hillary, it's war. There will be Hiroshimas and Nagasaki's everywhere. Victory for Trump would be a gift to humanity, but if Hillary Clinton wins, she will be the last U.S. president ever. Mrs. Clinton has previously accused Mr. Trump of being too cozy with Putin and questioned his business interest in Russia. But in comments that delighted Moscow, Trump has questioned the value of NATO, spoken about Russia's annexation of Ukraine's Crimea in 2014, and suggested that the United States, under his leadership, would adopt a more isolationist foreign policy. Trump won't care about Syria, Libya, and Iraq. And why on earth should America interfere in these countries? Trump will have a brilliant chance to make relations more peaceful. He's the only one who can do this, said Zelensky, adding that Mr. Trump would even win a Nobel Peace Prize. However, Mr. Zelensky described Mrs. Clinton as an evil mother-in-law and said her record as Secretary of State showed she was unfit to lead her country. Her view is that Hillary is the most important person on the planet, that America is an exceptional country, said Zelensky. That's dangerous. She could start nuclear war. In typically chauvinistic remarks, Mr. Zelensky said Mrs. Clinton's gender should also bar her from the presidency. Americans should choose Trump because men have been leading for millions of years. You can't take the risk of having one countries led by a woman, he said. Donald Trump's civil war with Republican Party escalated as insiders claimed his financial backers were starting to ask for their money back. He has been plunging in the polls since 11-year-old video revealed him boasting about groping women. Two major campaign donors are said to have buyer's remorse, according to emails revealed by NBC. So there's that information for you. The next one we have here is off the dailymail.co.uk. And it says, Russia orders all officials to fly home. Any relatives living abroad as tensions mount over the prospect of global war. Russia is ordering all its officials to fly home, any relatives living abroad amid heightened tensions over the prospect of global war, it has been claimed. Politicians and high-ranking figures are said to have received a warning from President Vladimir Putin to bring their loved ones home to the motherland, according to local media. It comes after Putin canceled a planned visit to France amid a furious row over Moscow's role in the Syrian conflict, and just days after it emerged the Kremlin had moved nuclear-capable missiles near to the Polish border. Leader Mikhail Gorbachev has also warned that the world is at a dangerous point due to rising tensions between Russia and the U.S. According to the Russian site Znak, That's znak.com. Administration staff, regional administrators, lawmakers of all levels, and employees of public corporations have been ordered to take their children out of foreign schools immediately. Failure to act will see officials jeopardizing their chances of promotion, local media has reported. The exact reason for the order is not yet clear, but Russian political analyst Stanislav Velosky is quoted by the Daily Star as saying, "This is all part of the package of measures to prepare elites for some big war." Relations between Russia and the U.S. are at their lowest since the Cold War and have soured in recent days after Washington pulled the plug on Syria talks and accused Russia of hacking attacks. The Kremlin has also suspended a series of nuclear pacts, including a symbolic cooperation deal to cut stocks of weapon-grade plutonium. Just days ago, it was reported that Russia had moved nuclear-capable missiles near to the Polish border as tensions escalated between the world's largest nation and the West. Iskander missiles sent to Kaliningrad, a Russian enclave on the Baltic Sea between NATO members Poland and Lithuania, are now within range of major Western cities, including Berlin. Polish officials, whose capital, Warsaw, is potentially threatened, have described the move as of the highest concern. Putin's decision to cancel his Paris visit came the day after French President Francois Hollande said Syrian forces had committed a war crime in the battered city of Aleppo with the support of Russian airstrikes. Putin had been due in Paris on October the 19th to inaugurate a spiritual center at the new Russian Orthodox Church near the Eiffel Tower, but Hollande had insisted his Russian counterpart also took part in talks with him about Syria. The unprecedented cancellation of the visit so close to being finalized is a serious step, reminiscent of the Cold War, said Russian foreign policy analyst Fyodor Lakhanov. This is part of the broader escalation in the tensions between Russia and the West and Russia and NATO, he told the AFP. The Kremlin has also been angered over the banning of Russian parliamentary team from the Rio Olympics amid claims of state-sponsored doping of its athletes. The top advisor of the U.S. presidential candidate Hillary Clinton has said the FBI is investigating Russia's possible role in hacking thousands of his personal emails, but Russian officials have vigorously rejected accusations of meddling in the U.S. presidential election and dismissed allegations that Moscow was behind a series of recent hacks on U.S. institutions. Retired Russian Lieutenant General Evgeny Baskinsky told the BBC, of course, there is a reaction as far as Russia sees it, as Putin sees it, as full-scale confrontation on all fronts. If you want a confrontation, you'll get one, but it won't be a confrontation that doesn't harm the interests of the United States. You want a confrontation, you'll get one everywhere. Earlier this week, British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson waded into the row, calling for anti-war campaigners to protest outside the Russian embassy in London. Johnson said the wells of outrage are growing exhausted. Groups were not expressing sufficient outrage at the conflicts in Aleppo. Where is the Stop the War coalition at the moment? Where are they? He said during a parliamentary debate. And there's a bunch of videos in this URL if you want to take a look at those at your leisure. All these URLs are in the description of my video here. The next one we have here is off of us4.campaign. Is the Imperial President's Toolbox of Terror, a dictatorship waiting to happen. This is what I'll read to you. It says, when a president does it, that means that it is not legal. This is Richard Nixon, quote. Presidents don't give up power. Executive orders don't expire at the end of each presidential term. And every successive occupant of the Oval Office since George Washington, who issued the first executive order, has expanded the reach and power of the presidency. The Constitution invests the president with very specific unlimited powers to serve as commander-in-chief of the military, grant pardons, make treaties with the approval of Congress, appoint ambassadors and federal judges, again with Congress's blessing, and veto legislation. In recent years, however, American presidents have anointed themselves with the power to wage war, unilaterally kill Americans, torture prisoners, strip citizens of their rights, arrest and detain citizens indefinitely, carry out warrantless spying on Americans, and erect their own secretive shadow government. These are the powers that will be inherited by the next heir to the throne, and won't make any difference whether it's President Trump or President Clinton occupying the Oval Office. The powers amassed by each successive president through the negligence of Congress and the courts, powers which add up to a toolbox of terror for an imperial ruler, empower whomever occupies the Oval Office to act as dictator above the law and beyond any real accountability. Presidential powers, which have been acquired through the use of executive orders, decrees, memorandums, proclamations, national security directives, and legislative signing statements, and can be activated by any sitting president that have allowed past presidents to operate above the law and beyond the reach of the Constitution. The powers to kill. As the New York Times concluded, President Obama, who came to office promising transparency and adherence to the rule of law, has become the first president to claim the legal authority to order an American citizen killed without judicial involvement, real oversight, or public accountability. Obama's kill lists, signature drone strikes handpicked by the president, have been justified by the Justice Department and lawful because they are subject to internal deliberations by executive branch. In other words, writes Amy Davidson for the New Yorker, it's due process if the president thinks about it. The power to wage war. Ever since Congress granted George W. Bush the authorization to use military force in the wake of 9/11, the United States has been in a state of endless war without Congress ever having declared one. Having pledged to end Bush's wars, Barack Obama has extended them. As the New York Times notes, he has now been at war longer than Mr. Bush or any other American president. He will leave behind an improbable legacy as the only president in American history to serve 2 complete terms with the nation at war. More than that, it makes clear Obama is inaugurating an era of unbridled war making by the commander-in-chief without any checks and balances contemplated by the American constitutional system. The power to torture. Despite the fact that the Bush administration use of waterboarding as a torture tactic was soundly criticized by Obama, the Obama administration refused to hold anyone accountable for participating in the rendition and torture programs. In the absence of any finding of criminality, the authorization of such torture tactics remained part of the president's domain should he or she choose to revive it. The power to spy on American citizens. In the wake of 9/11 terror attacks, President Bush secretly authorized the National Security Agency to carry out surveillance on American phone calls and emails. The Bush administration claimed that the Constitution gives the president inherent powers to protect national security. The covert surveillance has continued under Obama. The power to indefinitely detain American citizens. In 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued an executive order requiring that all Japanese Americans be held in internment camps. Order was later rescinded. The U.S. Supreme Court declared it to be constitutional. The ruling has never been overturned, pointing out that such blatant illegal detentions could happen again with the blessing of the courts. Justice Scalia warned, in times of war, the law falls silent. In fact, each National Defense Authorization Act enacted since 2012 has included a provision that permits the military to detain individuals, including American citizens, indefinitely without trial. The power to strip American citizens of their constitutional rights. The Bush administration claimed it could strip American citizens of their constitutional rights, imprison them indefinitely, and deny them legal representation simply by labeling them as enemy combatants. While the Obama administration jettisons the use of the term enemy combatant, it has persisted in defending the president's unilateral and global right to detain anyone suspected of supporting terrorist activities, to secretly rewrite or sidestep the laws of the country. Secret courts, secret orders, and secret budgets have become standard operating procedure for president administrations in recent years. A good case in point is the President's Policy Directive 20, a secret order signed by President Obama as a means of thwarting cyber attacks. Based on what little information was leaked to the press about the clandestine directive, it appears that the president essentially put the military in charge of warding off possible cyber attack. A request by the Electronic Privacy Information Center seeking more details on the directive was allegedly denied because doing so caused exceptionally grave damage to the national security. However, the Electronic Privacy Information Center believes the order allows for military deployment within the United States, including the ability to shut off communications with the outside world if the military believes it's necessary. The power to transform the police into extensions of the military and indirectly institute martial law. What began in the late 1960s as a war on drugs transitioned into an all-out campaign to transform America's police forces into extensions of the military. Every successive president since Nixon has added to the police's arsenal tactics and authority. In fact, the Obama administration has accelerated police militarization by distributing military weapons and equipment to police and incentivizing SWAT teams, raids, and heavy-handed police tactics through the use of federal grants and asset forfeiture schemes. The power to command the largest military and intelligence capabilities in the world and in turn wag the dog, as law professor William P. Marshall points out. Roles as commander-in-chief and head of the executive branch, the president directly controls the most powerful military in the world and directs clandestine agencies such as the Central Intelligence Agency and National Security Agency. That control provides the president with immensely effective, non-transparent capabilities to further his political agenda and or diminish the political abilities of his opponents. Whether a president would cynically use such power solely for his political advantage has, of course, been the subject of political thrillers and the occasional political attack. President Clinton, for one, was accused of ordering the bombing of terrorist bases in Afghanistan to distract the nation from Lewinsky scandal. And President Nixon purportedly used the Federal Bureau of Investigation to investigate his political enemies. But regardless whether such abuses actually occurred, there is no doubt that the control of covert agencies provides ample opportunity for political mischief, particularly since the inherently secretive nature of these agencies means their actions often are hidden from public view. And the capabilities of these agencies increase through technology advances in surveillance and other methods of investigation. So does the power of the president. Thus, it doesn't matter what the pundits predict, the clandestine or the candidates promise and the people decree. It doesn't even matter whether the people elect Trump or Clinton. After all, politicians sing a different tune once elected. For instance, the Chicago Tribune editorial board observed that although Barack Obama opposed imperial tendencies of George W. Bush once in office, Obama wound up behaving as if he had a scepter and a throne. What matters is that the damage has already been done. Or as Professor Marshall explains, every extraordinary use of power by one president expands the availability of executive branch power for use by future presidents. Moreover, it doesn't even matter whether other presidents have chosen not to take advantage of any particular power, because it is a president's actions in using power rather than forsaking its use that has the precedential significance. In other words, each successive president continues to add to his office's list of extraordinary orders and directives, granting him or herself near dictatorial powers. So let's not have any more talk of which candidate would be more dangerous with these powers. The fact that any individual or branch government is empowered to act like a dictator is dangerous enough. Presidential powers has been going on for so long that it's become the norm, and it will continue no matter which corporate puppet wins the election. The Constitution be damned. The government of laws, idealized by John Adams, has fallen prey to government of men. As a result, we no longer have a system of checks and balances. The system of checks and balances that the framers envisioned now lacks effective checks and is no longer in balance, concludes Marshall. The implications of this are serious. The framers designed a system of separation of powers to combat government access and abuse to curb incompetence. They so believed that in the absence of an effective separation of power structure, such ills would inevitably follow. Unfortunately, however, power once taken is not easily surrendered. The solution is far from simple, but it's time, as Marshall suggests, to recalibrate the balance of power. This will mean putting an end to the use of executive orders, decrees, memorandums, proclamations, national security directives, and legislative as a means of getting around Congress and the courts. It will mean that Americans will have to stop letting their politics blind them to government wrongdoing, and it will mean holding all three branches of government accountable to the Constitution. If they abuse their powers, office. Thus far, Congress, with little spine, less integrity, and too busy running for re-election, has offered little attempt at oversight, enabling the president to ride roughshod over the Constitution. The media, the perfect accomplice in this stealthy, bloodless coup, continues to inundate us with the latest celebrity scandals, says virtually nothing about these burgeoning powers. All the while, most Americans continue to operate in blissful near ignorance, unaware or uncaring that the republic is about to fail. Yet, as I point out in my book, Battlefield America, the War on American People, it will be we the people, not the president, the politicians, the corporate elite, or the media who will suffer the consequences when freedom falls and tyranny rises. They may justify violating our freedoms in the name of whatever platform menace of the month threatens national security, but we the ones to pay the price. And that's how that commentary reads. The next one we have here is off of the New York Times, and it says, 2 women say Donald Trump touched them inappropriately. Donald Trump was emphatic in the second presidential debate. Yes, he had boasted about kissing women without permission and grabbing their genitals, but he had never actually done those things, he said. Under questioning on Sunday evening, I have not. At that moment, sitting at home in Manhattan, Jessica Leeds, age 74, felt he was lying to her face. I wanted to punch the screen, she said in an interview in an apartment. More than 3 decades ago, when she was traveling businesswoman at a paper company, Mrs. Leeds said she sat beside Mr. Trump in the first-class cabin of a flight to New York. They had never met before. About 45 minutes after takeoff, she recalled Mr. Trump lifted the armrest and began to touch her. According to Mrs. Leeds, Mr. Trump grabbed her breasts and tried to put his hand up her shirt. He was like an octopus, she said. His hands were everywhere. Of the plane, it was an assault, she said. Ms. Leeds has told the story at least 4 people close to her who also spoke with the New York Times. Mr. Trump claimed that he had never turned into actions and was similarly creating to a woman watching on Sunday night in Ohio, Rachel Crooks. Ms. Crooks was a 22-year-old receptionist at Bay Rock Group, a real estate investment and development company in Trump Tower in Manhattan, when she encountered Mr. Trump outside an elevator in a building one morning in 2005. that her company did business with Mr. Trump, she turned off. They shook hands, but Mr. Trump would not let go, she said. Instead, he began kissing her cheek. Then, she said, he kissed me directly on the mouth. It didn't feel like an accident, she said. I felt like a violation, or it felt like a violation. Mrs. Crooks recalled in an interview, I was so upset that he thought I was so insignificant that he could do that. Crooks returned to her desk and immediately called her sister, Brianne Webb, in a small Ohio town where they grew up, and told her what had happened. She was very worked up about it, said Mrs. Webb, or Ms. Webb, who recalled pressing her sister for details. Being from a town of 1,600 people, being naive, I was like, are you sure he didn't just miss trying to kiss you on the cheek? She said, no, he kissed me on the mouth. Not normal. In the days since Mr. Trump's campaign was jolted by 2005 recording that caught him bragging about pushing himself on women, he has insisted, as have his aides, that it was simply macho bluster. It's just words, he has said repeatedly. And his hope for salvaging his candidacy rests heavily on whether voters believe that claim. They should not, say Ms. Leeds and Ms. Crooks, whose stories have never been made public before, and their accounts echo those of other women who have previously came forward, like Temple Taggart, Utah, who said that Mr. Trump kissed her on the mouth more than once when she was 21-year-old pageant contestant. In a phone interview on Tuesday night, a highly agitated Mr. Trump denied every one of the women's claims. None of this ever took place, said Mr. Trump, who began shouting at the Times reporter who was questioning him. Times was making up the allegations to hurt him, and that he would sue the news organization if it reported them. Disgusting human being, he told the reporter as she questioned him about, asked whether he had ever done any of the kissing or groping that he had described on the recording. Mr. Trump was once again insistent. I don't do it. I don't do it. It was locker room talk. But for the women who shared their stories with the Times, the recording was more than that. As upsetting as it was, it offered them a kind of affirmation, they said. It was the case for Miss Taggart. Mr. Trump's description of how he kisses beautiful women without invitation described precisely what he did to her, she said. And then Mr. Trump said on the tape, it's like a magnet. Just kiss, don't even wait. Ms. Crooks and Ms. Leeds never reported their accounts to the authorities, but they both shared what happened to them with friends and family. Ms. Crooks did so immediately afterwards. Ms. Leeds described the event to those close to her more recently as Mr. Trump became more visible politically and ran for president. Ms. Leeds was 38 at the time and was living in Connecticut. She had been seated in coach, but the flight attendant invited her to take an empty seat in first class, she said. Mr. Trump, who did not yet own a fleet of private aircraft, records show. He introduced himself and shook her hand. They exchanged pleasantries, and Mr. Trump asked her if she was married. She was divorced and told him so. Later, after the dinner trays were cleared, she said Mr. Trump raised the armrest, moved toward her, and began to grope her. Ms. Leeds said she recoiled. She quickly left the first-class cabin and returned to coach, she said. I was angry and shook up, she recalled, as she sat on a couch in her New York City apartment on Tuesday. She did not complain to the airline staff at the time, Ms. Leeds said, because such unwanted advances from men occurred throughout her time in business in the 1970s and 1980s. We accepted it for years, she said, of the conduct. We were taught it was our fault. She recalled bumping into Mr. Trump at a charity event in New York about 2 years later and said he seemed to recall her, insulting her with a crude remark. The encounter on the plane out of her mind until last year when Mr. Trump's presidential campaign became more serious. Since then, she's told a widening circle of people, including her son, a nephew, and 2 friends, all of whom were contacted by the Times. They said they were sickened by what they heard. It made me shake, said Linda Ross, a neighbor and friend who spoke with Ms. Leeds about the interaction about 6 months ago. Of Ms. Leeds' friends, Ms. Ross encouraged her to tell her story to the news media. Ms. Leeds had resisted until Sunday's debate with Ms. Ross. When Mr. Trump denied having ever sexually assaulted women in response to a question from Anderson Cooper of CNN, Ms. Ross said she immediately looked at Ms. Leeds in disbelief. Straight up, Ms. Ross recalled saying. In the days after the debate, Ms. Leeds recounted her experiences in an email to the Times and a series of interviews. His behavior is deep-seated in his character, Ms. Leeds wrote in a message. To those who would vote for him, she added, I would wish for them to reflect on this. The encounter with Mr. Trump was further complicated by the fact that she worked in his building and risked running into him again. A few hours after Mr. Trump kissed her, Ms. Crooks returned to her apartment in Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn and broke at the time, Clint Hackenberg. I asked, how was your day? Mr. Hackenberg recalled. She paused for a second and then started hysterically crying. After Ms. Crooks described her experience with Mr. Trump, she discussed what to do. I think that was more upsetting than him kissing her was that she felt like she couldn't do anything to him because of his position. He said she was 22, secretary. It was her first job out of college. I remember her saying, I can't do anything to this guy because he's Donald Trump. Said Mr. Trump, who had recently married Melania, came into Bayrock office and requested her phone number. When she asked why he needed it, Mr. Trump told her he intended to pass it along to his modeling agency. Ms. Crooks was skeptical, but relented because of Mr. Trump's influence over her company. She never heard from the modeling agency. Per year working at Bayrock, she made a point of ducking out of sight every time Mr. Trump came into view. When Bayrock employees were invited to the Trump Organization Christmas party, she declined, wanting to avoid any other encounters with him. But the episode stuck with her even after she returned to Ohio, where she now works for a university. When she read a Times article in May about the Republican nominee treatment of women, she was struck by Ms. Taggart's recollection of being kissed on the mouth by Mr. Trump. I was upset that it happened to other people, but also took some comfort in knowing I wasn't the only one he had done it to, said Ms. Crooks, who reached out to the Times to share her story. Both Ms. Leeds and Ms. Crooks say they support Hillary Clinton's campaign for president, and Ms. Crooks has made contribution of less than $200 to President Obama and Mrs. Clinton. Ms. Crooks was initially reluctant to go public with her story, but felt about her experience. People should know, she said, Mr. Trump's behavior is pervasive and it is real. So there you have, more scandal in the campaign. Be glad when all this is over. Tab here is prophecynewswatch.com. Suicidal ballot in Colorado. Will the right to die become the duty to die? In a recent article in National Review Online, George Weigel tells a story about just how far the culture of death has advanced in some parts of the West. Parishioners at the Canadian church he attends during the summer were diagnosed with cancer. Now that's bad enough, but what follows is even worse. The first thing they were asked after being told of their diagnosis was, do you wish to be euthanized? While this story should upset us, it shouldn't shock us. Despite all the promises made by supporters of physician-assisted suicide, the so-called safeguards against pressuring vulnerable people to end their lives have proved to be inadequate and have often been watered down or eliminated over time. Or, as Belgian law professor Anton Montereau observed, what is presented at first as a right to die is going to become a kind of obligation. Thus, in 14 years, Belgium went from euthanizing terminally ill adults to killing chronically ill adults to offering adults who had lost their finally disposing of children. As Weigel's story suggests, Canada seems literally hell-bent on catching up with Belgium in this regard. Physician-assisted suicide has only been legal there since the spring and has already transformed the practice of medicine in Canada. And if some Canadian philosophers get their way, a willingness to kill your patients will be prerequisite for practicing medicine in the Great White North. Now it's Colorado's turn to play the waiting room Russian roulette. This November, my fellow Coloradians and I will vote on Proposition 106, also known by its Orwellian title, the End of Life Options Act. The supporters of the act, which is modeled on California's recent legislation of the same name, assure voters that the vote for physician-assisted suicide is a vote for compassion. They assure us that it will remain limited to cases of extreme suffering. But as Weigel points out, the language of the proposed act is duplicitous. It characterizes killing someone as palliative care, and it defines an adult as anyone 18 or older, which leads to the absurdity of not being old enough to drink, but old enough to request assistance in killing yourself. Handed admission of guilty conscience, the deceased death certificate would list the cause of death as the illness they suffered from and not suicide. If supporters of assisted suicide need to mislead and obfuscate about basic matters such as these, why should we believe their assurances that no one will be coerced into killing themselves? Little wonder that disability advocates oppose the measure. Colorado's history should also give us pause. 32 years ago, then Governor of Colorado Richard Lamb told a group of healthcare lawyers that terminally ill elderly have a duty to die and get out of the way instead of trying to prolong their lives. He compared the fulfillment of this duty to leave falling off a tree and humus for other plants to grow up. It would be foolish to think that the right to die won't, much less can't, one day become the duty to die, especially in an aging society where healthcare costs as a percentage of the GDP are projected to double over the next 25 years. By the way, also on the Colorado ballot this year is state-run healthcare. The only way to prevent the right to die from becoming duty to die is to reject the right to die from the start. Anything else places the most vulnerable, the elderly and especially the disabled, on an already well-greased slippery slope. Unless the Lord returns, each and every one of us will die of old age, disease, or tragedy, and except in the case of tragedy, if the advocates of so-called compassion have their way, you and I, or ones, will end up facing the same question George Weigel's fellow parishioners were asked. Do you wish to be euthanized? So there you have that information out of Colorado. The next one we have is off of foxnews.com. It says San Antonio police officers face discipline for wearing Make America Great Again caps. It says a handful of San Antonio officers face disciplinary measures after appearing in a video for Republican president candidate Donald Trump on Tuesday sporting a red Make America Great Again cap. According to Fox, San Antonio city policy bans employees from getting involved in politics while serving as city employees. William McManus told the officers violated policy and would be disciplined. Campaign hats while in uniform violated SAP and will be disciplined appropriately, McManus said in a statement. SAPD officers were charged with protecting the entire, are charged with protecting the entire community. The officers displayed poor judgment. I expect them to know better than to give it endorsing a candidate while on duty and in uniform, regardless of the political campaign or the candidate. They called the officers' decisions disappointing. I am deeply disappointed by some of our SAPD officers' lack of judgment, Taylor said in a statement posted on her Facebook page. While on duty, police must be above politics with an obligation to serve everyone equally. Everything they do should send that message and today's action did not. San Antonio Express News reported that the officers were part of Trump's helped escort him to and from San Antonio International Airport. In the brief video that Trump tweeted, the billionaire businessman was heard saying, "Thank you, fellas." Michael Hale, president of the San Antonio Police Officers Association, told the paper that the officers can't do that stuff while on duty. He later said in a statement that they were probably caught up in the moment. Officers will probably get some sort of written reprimand or counseling to not do that sort of thing on duty. So there you have that information. The next one we have here is off of nation.com. 5 corporations now dominate our privatized intelligence industry. This oligarchy of spies controls the information that guides our military and civilian leaders. The recent interrogation of 2 military contractors into the recent integration of 2 military contractors into $10 billion behemoth is the latest wave of mergers and acquisitions that have transformed America's privatized high-tech intelligence system into what looks like an old-fashioned monopoly. In August, a major contractor for the Pentagon and National Security Agency, completed a long-planned merger with the Information Systems and Global Solutions Division of Lockheed Martin, the global military giant. The 8,000 operatives employed by the new company do everything from analyzing signals for NASA to tracking down suspected enemy fighters for the U.S. Special Forces in the Middle East and Africa. The sheer size of the new entity makes Leidos one of the most powerful companies in the intelligence contracting industry, which is worth about $50 billion according to comprehensive study I've just completed on public and private employment in intelligence. Leidos is now the largest of 5 corporations that together employ nearly 80% of the private sector employees contracted to work for U.S. spy and surveillance agencies. Yes, that's 80%. For the first time since spy agencies began outsourcing their core analytic operational work in the late 1990s, the bulk of the contracted work goes to a handful of companies. Bose Allen Hamilton, CSRA, SAIC, and CACI International. This concentration of pure plays, a Wall Street term for companies that makes one product for single market, marks a fundamental shift in an industry that was once highly diverse, a mix of large military contractors, small and medium technology companies, and tiny beltway bandits surrounding Washington, D.C. Argue below, these developments are incredibly risky for a country more dependent than ever on intelligence to fight global wars and prevent domestic attacks. The problem with just 5 companies providing lion's share of contractors is that the client, the U.S. government, won't have much alternative when the company screws up. The author of Shadow Force, Private Security Contractors in Iraq. Moreover, the fact that much of this privatized work is top secret and is generally underreported in the press undermines the accountability and transparency of our spy agencies that should deeply concern the American public. There's so much less transparency in intelligence than in defense, says William Hartung, director of the Arms and Security Project at the Center for International Policy and the author of Prophets of War, a study of the political and social impact of Lockheed Martin. Pentagon contracting, people can dig out conflicts of interest and cost overruns. The pieces of information you can use to get your hands on the problem. Fortunately, there's plenty of public information to build a profile of these companies, and I'll start this analyst with a closer look at the members of the new monopoly and detailed explanation of how I reached my conclusions about the workforce, which has stood like a colossus over the U.S. intelligence as a contractor and consultant for over 30 years, is partly owned by the Carlyle Group, the politically connected private equity firm. Bose is basically the consigliere of the intelligence community, known in Washington as the IC, serving the Director of National Intelligence, Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, National Intelligence Civil Agency, and Military Intelligence, according to the company's website. Can be lethal. Under a contract with the Army Intelligence, Bo's personnel rapidly track high-value individuals targeted by the U.S. military in a system now deployed and fully operational in Afghanistan. CSRA Incorporated was created out of the merger between CSC, which developed and manages the classified internal communication system, and the SRA International, a highly profitable company with a long history of involvement in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, ISR. Of other contracts, CSRA, which has close ties to the U.S. Air Force, provides 24/7 support for the global operations of U.S. commands in Europe and Africa, and under a January 2016 contract, manages the global network of intelligence platforms for the most advanced drones in the U.S. arsenal. And in a bizarre set of contracts with the Pentagon prison in Guantanamo, it was hired to help both the defense and prosecution in the military trials of individuals accused of planning the 9/11 attacks. It's a well-known military contractor that has expanded into spying by buying Sector, a company deeply embedded in the Pentagon's top secret satellite operations. Sector's real value for SAIC is its reach into the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, satellites, and integrates download signals and imagery from space for NSA and the National Global Intelligence Agency. SAIC's latest project is an $8.5 million contract from the Army's Intelligence and Security Command for aerial ISR in Afghanistan to be partially carried out at the NSA's huge listening post in Fort Gordon, Georgia. SAIC International is the Pentagon contractor infamous for supplying interrogators to the U.S. military prison Graba in Iraq. CACI recently acquired two companies doing extensive work for the NSA and the CIA, National Security Solutions, bought from L3 Communications, and 6-3 Intelligence Solutions. Both have given CACI new inroads into national intelligence. 6-3, for example, recently won substantial contracts to provide counterinsurgency targeting to NATO forces in Afghanistan. It also just won a new Army contract to provide intelligence to U.S. military forces in Syria. Deeply, U.S. forces are now engaged there. It's also the only contractor I know that qualifies its results. CACI's intelligence services have identified more than 1,500 terrorists threatening our nation, it claims. Together, Leidos and its four competitors earned nearly $16 billion from government IT contracts in 2015, according to annual listing by the trade publication Washington Technology. But the key to their dominance lies not with their revenue, but with their employees. Significantly, there are approximately 45,000 contractors with security clearances who work alongside government employees at NSA and CIA and other agencies. The size of this workforce is difficult to come by, in part because the government likes to keep it secret, but most contractors provide figures on their cleared workforce in annual reports, media briefings, and press releases on new acquisitions, largely to impress government clients and potential investors. Here's what I found in my study. Leidos employed 9,400 people holding security clearances, according to the figures on its website that were confirmed by a company spokesperson. They are now joined with about 2,000 cleared employees from Lockheed's IT unit for a total of 11,400 cleared professionals. In a story on the merger, Washington Post said the total number was 13,000. Then I took into account the company's share earnings from military intelligence, 27% of its revenue, according to Leidos, and civilian contracts, and concluded that Leidos' intelligence workforce now numbers about 8,000. The figures for its competitors using the same calculations are equally staggering. Booz Allen deploys an intelligence workforce of 12,000 cleared personnel, CACI 10,000, CSRA 8,000, and SAIC 6,600. Added together, the five companies employ 44 cleared personnel, which are rounded out to 45,000. That's nearly 80% of the total contractor workforce of 58,000, the total workforce of 183,000 civilian contractors and uniformed soldiers working in national and military intelligence. As I did with Litos, I ran my numbers by each company with varying results. Both said my estimate was false and not accurate, but it declined my request to interview Ronald Sanders, a Bose vice president, who, as the Chief Human Capital Officer, presided over the office's first inventory of contractor personnel in 2007. Would not participate in this opportunity. SAIC said my figures were accurate, and CACI, per its usual practice, did not respond. None of them convinced me I was off base. The aggregate workforce figures were derived from comparing the corporate statistics listed above to contractor data buried in the U.S. intelligence budgets. The number of contractors in intelligence was first revealed in 2013 when Edward Snowden leaked the details of a classified $52.6 billion budget for the National Intelligence Program, NIP. That document showed that the workforce at just over 107,000, while an accompanying graphic explained that some 20% of them, or 21,400, were contractors. That total was down by 3% from 2011 when Senator Dianne Feinstein, then the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, told Congress that contractors accounted for 23% of the NIP workforce. The national budget covers the CIA, intelligence units of the Department of Homeland Security, and 14 other government agencies, as well as parts of the NSA that report directly to the president. My second source for the IC's employment figures is the budget for military intelligence programs, MIP, which funds operational and tactical programs carried out by the armed services and units of the NSA and the NGA that are under direct Pentagon command. A top-line version of the 2016 MIP budget, $17.9 billion, was released in February by the Defense Department, but it did not include any personal numbers. However, in congressional testimony in 2013, when $18.6 billion was allocated for MIP, the Pentagon said it employed a total intelligence workforce of 183,000, including civilian and contractor employees, plus uniformed military. The Pentagon doesn't break out contractor figures, however, such details remain classified for national security reasons, the DoD explains. So, to find those figures, I applied the same 20% breakdown found in Snowden's leaked national intelligence document. That would mean a military intelligence contractor workforce of 36,600, a reasonable estimate that's probably too low, I was told by several experts. For the grand total, I added national military programs together and came up with my conclusion that 58,000 contractors work in U.S. intelligence. As you can see, by employing 45,000 of them, pure plays, Litos, Booz Allen, CSRA, SAIC, and CACI control a huge chunk of the total. These five, of course, are not the only players in this market. Our workforce include thousands of professionals from the still formidable intelligence divisions of Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Raytheon, BAE, and Accenture, a handful of smaller companies, including Mantech International Corporation, Engility Corporation, L3 Communications, and PAE. A similar analysis of these firms, I believe, would show that they make up the rest of the intelligence force by the Big Five. So here's the bottom line. Not only has intelligence been privatized to an unmanageable degree, but an unprecedented consolidation of corporate power inside the U.S. intelligence has left the country dangerously dependent on a handful of companies for its spying and surveillance needs. To be sure, concentration by itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when a few companies dominate a single market, as in banking or the railroads, the result can be greater efficiencies all around and sometimes even lower prices. Is well regulated. But if not, we know from the collapse of Wall Street a few years ago, the downside can be pretty ugly. High-level corruption, taxpayer bailouts, business failures that create destructive ripple effects throughout society happen in the intelligence contracting. There comes a point when the marketplace is so concentrated that the service providers simply become too big to fail. No matter how lousy their performance, says Heisenberg, who closely monitors the privatization of national security work. If that makes you think this industry, well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. In fact, being too big to fail is especially potent in intelligence, which has experienced numerous failures over the years. One of the most spectacular was the infamous Trailblazer project at NSA. It was designed by contractors in the spring of to revolutionize NSA's collection of signals. Intelligence from CIC won the prime contract to build it. But Trailblazer ended up a costly failure, wasting over $7 billion, according to whistleblower Tom Drake, who was senior NSA executive from 2001 to 2008. In 2003, because Drake and others had blown the whistle on the project, Trailblazer was the subject of a highly critical Pentagon audit for fraud. But the audit still remains classified to this day, and prime culprits, SAIC and Bose Allen, which helped design it, continue to win big contracts despite strong evidence that they wasted billions of taxpayer dollars and modified and suppressed studies about the project. When companies found to have falsified documents, even committed outright fraud, they are often so large and specialized that they compel the government to overlook these violations, warns Mike German, a former FBI special agent who works on counterterrorism issues as a fellow with NYU's Brennan Center for Justice. Especially with intelligence being such a nubious, doing wrong doesn't always result in a reassessment of methods. Yet, with few exceptions, intelligence privatization has been largely ignored. Media and publications established to expose what they call the surveillance state, and Congress, by ignoring this huge elephant in the room, is simply not doing its job. If there's one agency that could replicate, correct, or debunk my findings, it would be the Office of Director of National Intelligence. The ODNI is responsible for overseeing the intelligence workforce and its operations and provides contractor data to Congress. A little surprised that ODNI officials did not respond to my inquiries about the 5 companies that dominate the industry, not even to offer a no comment. In public documents and congressional hearings, however, our intelligent overlords frequently recognize the existence of this private army as core contract personnel. The ODNI, in its public testimony, describes them as as functionally indistinguishable from U.S. government personnel whose missions they support. Activities that include collection, analysts, technology, training, and education. James Clapper, President Obama's Director of National Intelligence, knows privatization from his own experience. From 1998 to 2001, he was the Director of Intelligence Programs for SRA International, the predecessor to CSRA. Moreover, his own office is crawling with contractors. According to a declassified ODNI budget that was released under a Freedom of Information Act request last spring, contractors hold 44% of the position in Clapper's office, including 13% of his senior leadership. That total is twice as high as contractor penetration in the rest of the intelligence community, and further evidence of how much our spying is done for profit. In public, Clapper makes no bones about those corporate ties. If you can't get a job in the IC, then sign on with one of our contractors, he told an intelligence conference last fall. Industry is absolutely crucial to our continued viability and success. But if that's true, why not let us know the names of all those companies? Officials say. In many cases, our relationship with specific contractors is classified at their request. Stephanie O'Sullivan, a Clapper deputy at ODNI, explained to a 2014 Senate hearing the last time the subject came up in Congress, going public, she added, would reveal an interest and or involvement with specific technologies or activities that could create vulnerabilities that can be exploited by our enemies. A rejoinder from the Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill. What is really interesting, she replied, is we are paying Booz Allen Hamilton for administrative support services, but we cannot even talk about how much we are paying them or how many there are, even though they have it on their website. What's at stake in intelligence outsourcing is not just the movement of money and goods, but also the security of American public and control over the information that keeps us safe. The market concentration in this sector, therefore, has deeper and more sinister implications than in civilian industries such as finance or telecommunications. That fewer and fewer companies control the information that guides our military and civilian leaders and, by extension, shapes America's view of the world and the military and political actions it takes. The best analogy is the media itself, which has seen incredible concentration over the past half century. Consider the Consider the precedent's words of Ben Bedikian, the late great editor and media critic. When 50 men and women, chiefs of their corporations, control more than half the information and ideas that reach 220 million Americans, it's time for Americans to examine the institutions from which they receive their daily picture of the world. Vatican wrote over 30 years ago in his classic study of the press, The Media Monopoly. Whether evil or benevolent, centralized control over information, whether governmental or private, is incompatible with freedom, emphasis added. The same logic should be applied to intelligence and the way our government and military receive their daily view of the world. And the media to finally recognize spying as a joint venture between security state and private sector. In the end, intelligence is a public resource that is controlled by the people and for the people, and not benefit small group of corporations and the oligarchs they've spawned. So there's that information for you. The next one that I have is off of KFYRTV.com. For this one to hear. My poor little three-legged hamster in the wheel. So he can run. Yeah, we'll try to reload it and see if that helps any. Run, little hamster, run. You're going to need an extra carrot after this day's over. Okay, this one is 2 Minnesota women arrested in pipeline protest, officials say could have had tragic consequences. We'll scroll down a little bit here. Let's see. This is out of Minnesota. It says 2 women were arrested in Clearbrook, Minnesota, Tuesday in connection with an oil pipeline protest, officials say could have ended with tragic consequences. It was part of the protest in several states that environmentalists were held to avert climate catastrophe. They say they're standing in solidarity with Standing Rock. Protesters posted their actions live on Facebook from control valve station near his pipeline distribution center at Clearbrook, 30 miles northwest of Brenda, I guess that's pronounced. They cut the chain, locking the control valve, and started turning it off. Protesters did not realize is that the crude oil is pumped extremely high pressure through the pipeline, officials say. Losing a valve could have had extreme consequences, including possible explosion. Yes, it certainly could have been a very dangerous incident. The group involved in the incident claims to be protecting the environment, but their actions alone in an environmental incident, says Shannon Gustafson, Enbridge. Gustafson says Enbridge was able to shut down that pipeline before protesters had the valve closed. They put the safety of people, including themselves, potentially first responders, and our employees at risk. These are criminal acts that endanger the public and environment very seriously and will support the prosecution of all those involved, says Gustafson. So there's that information on the pipeline arrests. The next one is your feel good for the day. And this is off of shareably.net. And it's a nice little story. Many of you may have heard this before, but it bears repeating because many of us forget. The carpenter I hired to help me restore an old farmhouse had just finished a rough first day on the job. Flat tire made him lose an hour of work. His electric saw quit, and now his ancient pickup truck refused to start. While I drove him home, he sat in stony silence. On arriving, he invited me to meet his family. As we walked toward the front door, he paused briefly at a small tree, touching the tips of the branches with both hands, and when opening the door, he underwent an amazing transformation. His tanned face was wreathed in smiles, and he hugged his two small children and gave his wife a kiss. Afterwards, he walked me to the car. We passed the tree, and my curiosity got the better of me. I asked him about what I'd seen him do earlier. He replied, I know I can't help having troubles on the job, but one thing's for sure, troubles don't belong in a house with the wife and the children, so I just hang them on the tree every night when I come home. I pick them up again. The thing is, he smiled, when I come home, or when I come out in the morning to pick them up, there ain't nearly as many as I remembered hanging up there the night before. So there you go. Everybody needs a trouble tree. We tend to drag our baggage around with us and let it cumber us down and bog us down, and other people in our lives with our issues from work, or trouble people at work with our issues from home, or whatever. Everybody just needs to hang that stuff up on a tree and let it air out good and not drag it around. Remember, we're in a matrix. Everything is only as difficult as we make it be. When you get up of a morning, do you get up with a bad humor and say, boy, this day's gonna suck, and wow, dreading doing this and dreading doing that? Or do your feet hit the floor every morning being glad that you woke up above ground and happy to start your day and wondering what miraculous things that you'll encounter throughout your day? Do you look for the creative things that's in front of you, or do you have your head down worried with everything that goes on around you? We need to hang our troubles up on that trouble tree. And that's going to conclude the day. I hope you go out and stick your feet in the grass today and ground yourself, take a deep breath of fresh air, soak up some earth energy, and we'll see you back here tomorrow for more news.